We're always warned about dwelling in the past, especially the bad past. I think that's true to some extent, but let me explain. Someone once said, those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. I do believe these words and do believe we have responsibility at times to look at the past. Looking at the past when it will guide our steps into a successful future. The past is not meant to be cement to hold us hostage to our mistakes and blunders, but it should help us reflect when we need the past to help make a wise future decision. I believe reflecting on the past is not the same as living in the past. There are certain parts of all of our past that can either keep us stuck and condemned, or it could be reflective and make us wiser. It's up to us how we use our past. Welcome to the 260 Journey. And this is the truth that the Apostle Paul is bringing to light for the Corinthians in chapter 10. Listen to these words from Paul as he reflects on the blunders of the children of Israel in the desert. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 6. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test Christ as some of them did, and they were killed by snakes. And do not grumble as some of them did and were killed by the destroying angel. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us on whom the culmination of the ages have come. I believe it was leadership guru John Maxwell who said experience is not the best teacher, but evaluated experience. That's the best teacher. I don't have to sin to understand sin better. I can evaluate others' experiences to help me come to a wise conclusion. And Paul is asking us to use a scenario from almost 2,000 years earlier. Paul was asking the Corinthians and us to evaluate their bad decisions so we can make good decisions in the future. Paul starts off the section that these are not just Old Testament stories you're reading, but these are things that occurred as examples for us and to keep us from doing the same thing. That means when you read the Old Testament, you read those stories not with simply a historical mindset, but as a present day student, imposing this question to the text. What is this saying to me? How can this story help me? These are not stories, these are examples and warnings for every one of us. Look at the four things he warns against. Do not be idolaters. We probably should pause at this word idolatry for a moment. When we hear it, we immediately think of an ugly statue that men bow down to and claim to be over them. I think 21st century idolatry still exists. I think the statues are a little less conspicuous. They may have an apple on them and we can carry them in our hand. It can be a little box on top of the TV that will not let us stop gaming and playing. It can be even a person, a sport, a casino, or something in a glass. Idolatry is what has the power over you. So Paul says, do not be idolaters. Do not commit sexual immorality. That's having sex outside of marriage. He then goes on to say, do not test the Lord. What does that mean? It's you going into a tough season with no regard of God's faithfulness and deliverance in your past. You test God when you go into a difficult moment with no recollection or memory of what God did before to help you. That's an affront to God. And then he finally says, do not grumble. And then Paul reminds us again in verse 11, these things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us. He starts in verse 6 with these words, these things happen as an example, and bookends it with the same words in verse 11. Paul was saying these are not just stories of the past, these are markers, reminders, reflective material for us to live in a successful future. The challenge for us is to read them that way. And Paul ends with this final exhortation, verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able. But with the temptation will provide the way of escape so that you will be able to endure it. D.L. Moody said, God never made a promise too good to be true. This is one of those. Keeping all the past in mind, here's how you get out of a difficult present. Endure and exit. It's two ways through hell. There's always an exit for you, and there's always strength to endure. Satan's job in those times is to blind your eyes and create a narrative like this. No one has ever gone through this. You're the only one, so God must hate you. And this is so intense, there's no way out, and this will finally crush you. Neither of these are true. It will never be too much to handle. No one can say there's no way to overcome this. If you do, then God just lied to us in that verse. God is faithful to provide the way of escape. There will always be a way of escape or he will give us the strength to endure. But Satan blinds eyes, according to 2 Corinthians 4, in temptation, in the casino, in the arms of a lover, at a website, around a bottle, so you don't see your family, your future, or don't even see God himself. And Paul says, those people in the desert went blind and forgot that there is a way out and that there is strength to make it through. When you don't see that, you never move forward. Paul connects three important words with every trial and temptation. Don't miss them. Here they are. God is faithful. Theologian Wayne Grudem says it like this: God's faithfulness means that God will always do what he says and fulfill what he has promised. Alexander Gross said, there's more safety with Christ in the storm than without Christ in the calmest waters. Don't forget that. My mind goes back to this hymn I sang so many times growing up in the church. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever will be. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Thanks for joining the 260 Journey.